The message arrived without a sender, a whisper of pure mathematics that bloomed in the quantum foam and resolved itself into the mind of every astrogator, physicist, and AI in the Sol system. It was not a threat, it was a theorem, a final, irrefutable proof of cosmic insignificance. The beings who sent it called themselves the Architects, and they were not conquerors, they were editors. Their fleet, if such a term could apply to the silent, geometric impossibilities that folded space around them, did not fire a single shot. They simply began to erase. First went the Oort cloud, its icy sentinels and automated mining outposts vanishing from existence, not with an explosion, but with the quiet finality of a line of code being deleted. Then went Pluto, then Neptune, each celestial body and its attendant moons excised from the fabric of reality so cleanly that the gravitational ripples were the only evidence they had ever been there. The outer rim colonies, humanity's first faltering steps into the interstellar dark, were gone in the span of a single, silent hour. There were no screams, no final transmissions, only a growing, perfect void where millions of lives had once been. The United Terran Directorate, the inheritors of a unified Earth, watched from their command center deep beneath the bedrock of Olympus Mons as the wave of non-existence crept inward. Their fleets, the pride of a dozen generations, were useless. You could not shoot a mathematical certainty. You cannot bomb a philosophical truth. The Architects were not destroying humanity. They were simplifying the equation, and humanity was a variable deemed unnecessary. Desperation gnawed at the edges of military discipline. Admirals who had carved their names into the histories of the Titan Wars and the Proxima campaigns now stared at their tactical displays with the vacant eyes of men who knew they were already ghosts. They had weapons that could crack planets, shields that could withstand the heart of a star, but they were trying to fight a tide that wasn't made of water, but of logic. They were facing the universe's final answer, and it was no. In a chamber shielded by a kilometer of solid rock and layers of chronoton-laced alloy, a single man was brought out of a sleep deeper than death. He wasn't a soldier, not in any traditional sense. He had no rank, no uniform, only a designation, Subject 734. His real name had been buried so deep in redacted files that even the Directorate's most powerful AIs claimed it was lost. They called him Jonah. He was the sole surviving operator of Project Chimera, a program so black it made black holes look gray. The project's goal had been simple and monstrous: to create a human mind that could interface directly with space-time, to weaponize perception itself. They had started with 100 candidates, psychics and savants of the highest order. 99 had gone insane or simply dissolved into screaming paradoxes. Jonah had survived. He had looked into the raw, unstructured chaos that underpinned reality and had not broken. Instead, he had bent it. He was not a pilot who flew a ship. He was the ship. He was not a gunner who fired a weapon. He was the weapon. He sat now in a chair that looked more like a throne of tangled nerves and cold, black metal, the air around him humming with a power that felt fundamentally wrong. His body was a road map of scars, not from battle, but from the process of his own creation. His eyes, when they finally opened, were the color of a dead star, containing an emptiness that mirrored the encroaching void. General Eris Thorn, a man whose face was carved from granite and regret, stood before him. "They're here," Thorn said, his voice stripped of all ceremony. "The Architects. They're erasing everything." Jonah didn't speak. He hadn't spoken a word in 17 years. His thoughts were no longer compatible with the slow, clumsy architecture of human language. Instead, a wave of pure comprehension washed over Thorn images, feelings, concepts. "I know. I've been watching them in my sleep." Thorn flinched. The Directorate had kept Jonah in a quantum-induced coma, a state they believed was devoid of all consciousness. The thought that he had been aware, adrift in the timeless space they'd consigned him to, was chilling. "The fleet is gone. Mars is simplifying. They'll be at Earth's orbit in less than a day." A flicker of something that might have been amusement, or perhaps just profound weariness, passed from Jonah to the General. "You locked me away because you feared what I was. Now you want me to save you from what you are not." "We have no other choice," Thorn admitted, the words tasting like ash. Project Chimera was designed for this, a threat beyond conventional understanding, a metaphysical war. "You don't have a ship for me," Jonah projected. The thought was not a question, but a statement of fact. The Nyx, the only vessel ever constructed that could house and amplify his abilities, had been scuttled years ago, deemed too dangerous to exist. "No," Thorn said, gesturing to the cavernous chamber around them. "We don't. This facility, this is the ship now. We repurposed the entire sector, the geothermal vents, the planetary magnetic field generators, the primary defense grid. It's all been rerouted, focused right here, to you." Jonah's gaze drifted past the General, seeing not the walls of the chamber, but the intricate web of energies being funneled into his throne. He was being plugged into the very heart of the planet. He was to become the soul of a world-sized machine. "It will kill me," he stated, a cold, flat certainty that chilled Thorn to his marrow. "The feedback loop will cascade. My mind can bend reality, but it cannot become it. The strain will unmake me atom by atom." Thorn didn't deny it. "The analysts give you a 17% chance of surviving the initial sink. If you do, they give you less than 1% chance of surviving the engagement." "And the alternative?" Jonah asked. Thorn's eyes met the dead stars of Jonah's. "Zero." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the thrum of a planet being turned into a weapon. Then, a single, sharp concept, like the crack of a whip, emanated from Jonah. "Wake her up." The order sent a tremor of shock and fear through Thorn that the architects themselves hadn't managed to induce. He knew who her was. There was only one other component of Project Chimera that hadn't been destroyed, the Navigator. Subject 218, codename Lilith. She was the other side of the coin, the yin to Jonah's yang, where Jonah's mind could impose its will on the material universe. Lilith's could navigate the pathways of the immaterial. She could see the unseen, chart courses through probability, and find anchor points in the storm of chaos. She was the one who had kept Jonah sane during his transformation, her consciousness a steady lighthouse in the maelstrom of his own. But she had paid a different price. When the project was shut down, they had found her not insane, but absent. Her body was alive, healthy, but her mind had retreated to a place no scanner could reach, no drug could touch. She was locked in a labyrinth of her own making, lost in the very spaces she was meant to chart. "She's catatonic, Jonah," Thorn said, his voice low. "She hasn't responded to any stimulus in almost 2 decades. The medical staff says there's nothing left. Her mind is gone." No, Jonah projected, the thought sharp, insistent, not gone. Waiting. The architects aren't just erasing matter, they're erasing causality. Possibility. It's a conceptual attack. I can be the sword, but I will be striking blind. I need a guide. I need my navigator. Wake her up. Thorn wrestled with the implications. Reintegrating Lilith into the system was a risk they hadn't even dared to simulate. Her dormant mind was an unknown variable of terrifying magnitude. If she was unstable, she could unravel Jonah's focus before he even began, dooming them all. But the cold certainty in Jonah's projection was undeniable. This wasn't a request. It was a requirement. "All right," Thorn said, turning to a subordinate officer whose face was pale with dread. "Initiate Protocol Lazarus. Bring the navigator online." While they prepared Lilith, Jonah began the sync. He closed his eyes and let the planet's energy flow into him. It began as a whisper, the faint magnetic pulse of the iron core, the slow, grinding groan of tectonic plates, the hum of a billion sleeping machines. Then it became a roar. The full, untamed power of a living world flooded his senses. He felt the pull of the moon on the tides, the heat of the sun on the day side, the icy chill of the night. He felt every life, every thought, every dream of the 8 billion souls on the surface. A chorus of hope and terror that threatened to overwhelm him. His physical body began to seize, arcs of blue energy dancing across his skin. Alarms blared across the control room as his vital signs flatlined, then shot into impossible registers. He was dying. He was being reborn. He pushed his consciousness outward, beyond the confines of his own skull, beyond the mountain, spreading like a phantom wave across the globe. He touched the arrays in geosynchronous orbit, tasted the solar winds, and felt the cold, hard vacuum where Uranus used to be. And then he felt them, the architects. Their presence was a perfect, symmetrical coldness, a region of space where the laws of physics were being calmly, politely rewritten. There was no malice in them, no anger, just the serene, implacable focus of a gardener weeding a patch of cosmic soil. They were so far beyond humanity in scope and power that they barely registered humanity's existence as anything more than a complex microbial colony on a speck of dust. Jonah's mind, now amplified by the power of a planet, reached out to touch one of the geometric shapes. The instant he made contact, a feedback loop of pure agony slammed back into him. It wasn't an attack. It was the simple consequence of a lesser being touching a greater one. It was the pain of a single-celled organism trying to comprehend the mind of a god. He recoiled, his concentration shattering. The planetary grid wavered, threatening to collapse. On the surface, skies flickered, and gravity fluctuated for a terrifying microsecond. "I can't see them," he broadcast to Thorn, a thought laced with the first hint of true despair. "They're minds. They're not minds. They are principles. How can I fight a principle?" It was in that moment of breaking that a new feeling entered the torrent of his consciousness. It was a soft, gentle current in the raging river of planetary power. It was a whisper in a hurricane, but it was perfectly clear. Here. The thought said, it was not a word, but a direction, a feeling. It was a light in the absolute dark. Lilith was awake. They brought her into the chamber on a hovering medical gurney. She was physically unchanged, a woman locked in time, her face serene and unlined, Her eyes closed as if in peaceful sleep. They connected the neural interface to the ports at the base of her skull. Her own throne, a smaller, more delicate counterpart to Jonah's monstrous chair. Her vital signs remained flat. Her brain activity a placid, dreamless hum. "There's no change, sir," a technician reported to Thorne, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's not responding." "She is," Jonah projected, his own consciousness stabilizing, finding a sudden, inexplicable anchor in the storm. "She's just not talking to you." And then he felt her. Her mind didn't enter his. It simply opened a door for him. The blinding, incomprehensible nature of the architects remained, but now, through her perception, Jonah could see the seams. She wasn't showing him the enemy. She was showing him the space around the enemy, the flaws, the infinitesimal gaps in their logic, the hairline fractures in their perfect, symmetrical reality. They were editors. Yes, but even an editor's red pen had to touch the page. Lilith was showing him the page. "They are not everywhere at once," she whispered in his mind, her thoughts like starlight. "They move between moments, editing one thread of reality, and then the next. They are perfect, but they are not infinite." Through her eyes, Jonah saw it a flicker. A single architect vessel, a crystalline dodecahedron the size of a city, was phasing out of one timeline to erase a segment of Earth's past the moment life first crawled from the oceans. If it succeeded, Earth would become a sterile rock, its entire history unwritten in a single act. The creature was invulnerable, untouchable, existing in a state of quantum superposition. But to act, it had to resolve itself. For a trillionth of a second, it had to become real. There, Lilith guided him. Not the ship, the shadow it casts in time. Jonah focused the entire power of the planet, not as a beam of energy, not as a physical projectile, but as a single, focused contradiction. He took the concept of to exist and the concept of to not exist and hurled them both at the exact coordinate in space-time Lilith had shown him. He weaponized a paradox. For a moment, nothing happened. The architect vessel continued its serene, silent work. Then, a flaw appeared on its perfect surface, a crack. It was not a physical break, but a fissure in its very nature. The vessel, a being of pure logic, had encountered a true impossibility, a question with no answer. And it broke. It didn't explode. It simply ceased to be coherent. Its perfect geometry unraveled, its form dissolving into a chaotic cloud of fractured light and broken laws of physics, which then collapsed and vanished. One was gone. On the surface of the earth, a collective, unconscious sigh of relief passed through 8 billion souls. A tension they didn't know they were holding suddenly released. In the control room beneath Olympus Mons, the tactical display showed a single, impossible hole in the advancing wall of non-existence. They had fought back. They had actually, impossibly, fought back. The officers and technicians stared in stunned silence, then erupted into a ragged cheer. General Thorne did not cheer. He looked at the two figures in their chairs. Lilith was as she had been, serene, her eyes closed. But Jonah was trembling violently. A thin trickle of blood, black and viscous, leaked from his eyes, his ears, his nose. The backlash from firing a planetary-scale weapon of conceptual warfare was tearing his mortal form apart. Jonah Thorne asked, his voice tight with apprehension. The response was weak, fragmented, laced with agony. It cost me so much. I can feel the pieces of my mind flaking away like old paint. He paused, gathering his strength. There are thousands of them. And they felt that. They're not just weeding anymore. Now, they're looking. As he sent the thought, the perfect, serene coldness of the architect fleet changed. The placid sense of gardening was gone. It was replaced by a new sensation, one that humanity understood intimately. It was the focused, undivided attention of something that had just been hurt. And now, it was angry. The game had changed. It was no longer an impersonal extermination. It had become a hunt, and Jonah, plugged into the heart of a world, had just become the most visible target in the universe. The attention of the architects was not like the heat of a star or the force of a blast wave. It was the weight of absolute certainty. The moment their focus shifted, space around the Earth grew brittle. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, anticipating the judgment of its masters. General Thorne and the staff of the Olympus Mons Command Center felt it, not as a sound or a vibration, but as a sudden, crushing pressure in their minds. A wave of intellectual vertigo that made the very concept of up and down feel like a fragile, temporary agreement on the tactical display. The silent, orderly advance of the erasure field stopped. In its place, the remaining architect vessels, thousands of crystalline forms, began to move, not through space, but with space. They rearranged themselves into a new formation, a lattice of impossible geometry that surrounded the solar system like a cage. They were no longer deleting, they were dissecting. The first true attack came not for Earth, but for its history. Jonah, still reeling from the backlash of his own attack, felt it through Lilith's senses first. She showed him a vision not of ships or weapons, but of a timeline unraveling. An architect vessel, a needle of frozen light, was targeting the Jurassic period. It wasn't going to erase the dinosaurs. It was going to alter the asteroid that killed them, allowing them to evolve, ensuring that mammals, and thus humanity, would never rise to prominence. It was a subtle, elegant checkmate delivered 65 million years in the past. They are not aiming for us. They're aiming for the idea of us. Lilith's thoughts came, calm and precise. A surgeon's diagnosis of a fatal wound. I can't stop it. Jonah, it's too far back. The causal link is too thin. Jonah's mind, a fractured mirror of what it once was, struggled to cohere. The pain was a constant, a white noise of screaming neurons and a soul being ground to dust. He could feel the gaps in his own memory, moments of his life that were now just empty spaces. He remembered the face of his instructor at the Chimera facility, but not his name. He remembered the feeling of rain on his skin, but not where or when. He was a library with half its books burned, but Lilith's presence was a steadying hand in the dark. Then we don't stop it there. He projected back, the thought raw and serrated. We pull it here. It was a move of pure, desperate madness. He couldn't reach into the past to fight the architect, so he would drag the conflict into the present, focusing the planetary grid. He didn't fire a paradox this time. He latched onto the thread of causality the architect was manipulating and pulled. For the briefest instant, the command center was filled with the smell of ozone and wet ferns, the humid, heavy air of a primeval jungle. On the surface, strange, Phantom images of giant reptilian beasts flickered in the skies above major cities, ghost monsters born of a temporal paradox. The Architect vessel, ripped from its task 65 million years in the past, was dragged screaming through the timeline and forcibly materialized in Earth's present orbit. It was disoriented, its logical perfection momentarily scrambled by the brute force journey through causality. It was all the opening Lilith needed. Now she commanded. Jonah unleashed hell. He didn't use a concept this time. He used a memory. He took the most potent, destructive force humanity had ever conceived, the collective memory and visceral fear of nuclear annihilation, and gave it form. He focused the dread of a billion minds during a century of Cold War, the imagery of mushroom clouds, the horror of fallout and radiation sickness, and he slammed it into the Architect's consciousness. The being of pure logic was struck by a tsunami of pure irrational terror. Its crystalline form flickered, its internal structure destabilizing as it tried to process an emotion it had no framework to understand. Its perfect symmetry warped, twisted, and then it shattered into a million silent shards of light that slowly faded into nothing. The phantoms in the sky vanished. The air in the command center returned to its sterile, recycled normality. But the cost was immense. Jonah slumped in his throne, his body convulsing. The act of weaponizing a collective memory had forced him to experience all of it. Every nightmare, every soldier's dying prayer, every civilian's scream. He wasn't just losing his past anymore. He was being drowned in a history that wasn't his own. It's too much. He whimpered into the private space of his and Lilith's linked minds. I'm losing myself in the echoes. I am here, she replied, her consciousness a cool balm on his burning mind. I will not let you drown. Look through my eyes. See what I see. She showed him her own internal world, the place she had inhabited for 2 decades. It wasn't a void or a prison. It was a garden of forking paths, an infinite library of moments that were, could be, and might have been. She had retreated not from madness, but into a place of perfect order, a sanctuary of pure potential. It was in this place that she had learned to see the architects, not as invaders, but as a different kind of gardener, one who saw potential as a weed to be pulled. Her long isolation had not been a catatonia. It had been a deep, silent study of the enemy. She had been preparing for this war her entire life. Her serenity flowed into him, helping him rebuild the shattered walls of his identity, piece by painful piece. But while they were occupied, the architects changed their strategy again. They had tried a direct assault on the present and a subtle one on the past. Both had been countered. Their cold, alien logic analyzed the data and came to a new conclusion. The weapon was Jonah, but the targeting system was Lilith. The next attack was not on Earth, or its timeline, or even on Jonah. It was for her. General Thorne watched the display as dozens of Architect vessels broke from the main lattice. They weren't moving toward the planet. They converged on a single, empty point in space. They began to emit a low-frequency resonance, a hum that resonated not in the electromagnetic spectrum, but in the very structure of reality. They were tuning their efforts, like musicians preparing a terrible symphony. What are they doing? He demanded of the bewildered science officers. They're not firing. There's no energy signature. In his throne, Jonah felt it instantly. A sudden, sharp disconnect. A wave of static flooding the link between him and Lilith. They were trying to cut her off, to isolate him. They know about you. he sent to her, a flare of panic in his thoughts. They're trying to build a cage around your mind. The resonance intensified. The architects were not building a physical cage, but a conceptual one. They were weaving a prison out of paradoxes and logical fallacies, a labyrinth from which a mind like Lilith's, built on order and potential, could never escape. They were using her own nature against her. For the first time, her calm wavered. The infinite garden of her mind began to wither. Paths twisted back on themselves, leading nowhere. The books in her library of moments began to fill with nonsense script. The architects were methodically erasing her sanity. Brick by brick, Jonah. They're unmaking my thoughts. Her mental voice was strained, laced with a fear that was more terrifying than any scream. The patterns, they don't connect anymore. I can't see the way out. Jonah felt a surge of cold fury unlike anything he had ever known. The architects had hurt him, were unmaking him, and he had accepted it as the cost of war. But they were touching her. They were defiling the one clean, perfect thing left in his universe. His purpose, which had been the abstract defense of a species, narrowed to a single, white-hot point: protect Lilith. He made a choice. Ignoring the incoming waves of erasure aimed at Earth's infrastructure, he began to pull power from the planetary grid, not to project outward, but to shield inward. He started to build a firewall, not of energy or code, but of pure, stubborn will around Lilith's consciousness. "What is he doing?" a technician shouted. "Power levels are diverting from the primary defense shield. He's rerouting everything to the navigator's interface. He's letting the attacks through," another cried out as displays flashed red. On the surface, chaos erupted. Without Jonah's active management of the planetary shield, the architects' subtle attacks began to land. Power grids failed, not because they were destroyed, but because the concept of electrical flow was temporarily suspended in their vicinity. Buildings didn't crumble, their molecular bonds simply loosened, causing them to sag like wax sculptures. It wasn't destruction, it was a malicious, cosmic prank, but one with deadly consequences. "Jonah, you have to stop," Thorn yelled into the command channel, his voice cracking. "You're sacrificing the planet to save her." Jonah didn't respond. He was locked in a battle far more intricate than Thorn could imagine. He was fighting for Lilith's soul. He poured his own fracturing memories, his own sense of self, into the firewall around her. He took the pain, the fear, the echoes of history he had absorbed, and used them as bricks and mortar. He built a fortress of human suffering around her garden of pure potential. He was shielding her from their flawless logic with the one thing they couldn't comprehend: the beautiful, chaotic, illogical mess of a human soul inside her mental prison. Lilith felt his presence. She saw the ugly, jagged walls of his pain surrounding her, protecting her. She felt his sacrifice, every memory he burned to fuel the shield, every piece of himself he gave up to keep her whole. And in that moment, something shifted within her. Her 20 years of passive observation ended. The Watcher became a warrior. She stopped trying to find a way out of the architect's labyrinth. Instead, she began to map it. She embraced its twisted logic, followed its impossible corridors, and learned its architecture. The architects had meant to build her a prison. Instead, they had given her a schematic of their own minds. They think in patterns. She sent to Jonah, her thoughts now sharp and clear, honed by the very trap meant to dull them. Cycles. Equations. They believe every problem has a single, optimal solution. They are predictable. Jonah held the shield, his body breaking down under the strain, the black blood now flowing in streams down his face. "Show me," he grunted. Lilith didn't show him a weak point on a ship. She showed him a flaw in the architect's core philosophy. She projected a concept into his mind, a piece of alien, ancient mathematics known to humanity as Gödel's incompleteness theorem. The idea that any logical system complex enough to be interesting cannot be both complete and consistent. There will always be true statements that cannot be proven. It was the ultimate poison to a race of beings built on the belief of absolute logical certainty. Their prison is strong, but it is a system, she explained. Therefore, it is incomplete. There is a truth inside their logic that their logic cannot contain, a question they cannot answer. Jonah understood. He gathered the last reserves of the planet's power, his own life force draining with it. He looked at the architect's cage of logic with Lilith's eyes and found the unprovable truth she had discovered lurking within it. Then, he didn't attack the cage. He simply asked the question. He broadcast the theorem, not as a weapon, but as a simple, undeniable statement, directly into the resonating network the architects had created. The effect was catastrophic. The symphony of coherent logic collapsed into discordant noise. The architect vessels that were generating the prison faltered, their own internal systems locked in a recursive loop, trying to solve a problem that was fundamentally unsolvable. Their perfect, interconnected network was paralyzed by a single, elegant shard of mathematical truth. The pressure on Lilith's mind vanished. The cage dissolved. Jonah collapsed the shield, his energy utterly spent. He slumped in his throne, barely conscious, his body little more than a husk. But he could feel Lilith. She was not only safe, she was more. Her mind, no longer just a passive observer, was now sharp, active, and angry. She was no longer just his navigator. She was his co-pilot. They had survived. They had won the second battle. But as Jonah faded into a sea of pain and exhaustion, he felt Thorn and the others pulling his consciousness back, trying to stabilize him. And he saw through the eyes of the Olympus Command Center the new image on the main tactical display. The architect lattice was reconfiguring again. The paralyzed vessels were being methodically disassembled and absorbed by the others. Their new formation was smaller, denser. They had learned that humanity's strength was not in its technology or its power, but in the chaotic, illogical bond between two broken people. And their next attack, he knew with a chilling certainty, would not be aimed at the sword or the compass. It would be aimed at the hand that held them both. The architect's third stratagem was one of insidious silence. Having failed to overpower Jonah or outwit Lilith, they turned their attention to the 8 billion souls on the planet below. The direct, reality-bending attacks ceased. The temporal incursions stopped. To the terrified populations on the surface, it seemed like a reprieve, a moment of impossible calm after the storm. But in the command center on Mars, General Thorn knew better. "They're not retreating," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the dense, ominous lattice of architect vessels. "They're listening." He was right. The architects were conducting the single largest intelligence-gathering operation in history. They were scanning every thought, every dream, every whispered fear and fleeting hope of every human being on Earth. They were not looking for military secrets or tactical weaknesses. They were looking for the cracks in the human spirit. They were looking for leverage. Jonah drifting in a fragile state between life and death. Felt it as a cold, creeping pressure. It was no longer the direct assault of a superior mind, but the subtle, pervasive chill of being observed, catalogued, and understood. The link between him and Lilith was their sanctuary, a private space where their thoughts intertwined, but even that felt exposed. They could feel the architects listening at the door. They're studying our attachments. Lilith projected to him, her thoughts a shield of calm around his own frayed consciousness. Love, grief, loyalty. They see these things not as strengths, but as exploitable variables in an equation. They're looking for a fulcrum. The first sign of what they were planning came not from space, but from within the command center itself. A junior science officer, a young woman named Ilara, suddenly gasped and clutched her head, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "My son," she whispered, staring at a blank console. "I can hear my son." Her son had died a year earlier, a casualty of a shuttle accident in the asteroid belt. Thorne's security officers moved toward her, but he waved them off. He watched, his face a grim mask, as Ilara began to have a one-sided conversation with a ghost, tears of joy and confusion streaming down her face. "He's not gone," she sobbed, looking at Thorne with pleading eyes. "They have him. The architects. They saved him. They're showing me. He's safe. He's waiting for me." It was a lie. Of course, a sophisticated, cruel, and perfectly targeted illusion. The architects had plucked the memory of her son from her mind and were projecting a flawless imitation back at her, a psychic puppet designed to break her will, and it was working. Across the planet, the phenomenon repeated itself millions of times over. A soldier on a barricade in what was left of London suddenly saw the face of his deceased wife in the clouds, beckoning to him. An elderly farmer in the plains of North America heard the laughter of his grandchildren, who had been lost when the Outer Rim colonies were erased. The architects were weaponizing hope, turning humanity's most cherished memories into instruments of psychological torture. They were offering a simple, terrible bargain: lay down your arms. Surrender your world, and we will give you back what you have lost. It's a lie. Jonah broadcast, a weak but desperate pulse sent out across the planetary grid. It's a trick. What they show you isn't real. But his voice was just one in a storm of phantom whispers. How could his warning compete with the promise of a lost child's embrace? He felt the collective will of humanity begin to fracture. The unified resolve that had held since the first attack was dissolving into a mire of personal grief and desperate, false hope. People were abandoning their posts, walking out into the streets with their arms outstretched, calling the names of their dead. The global defense network was collapsing not from an attack, but from a plague of sorrow. "They're not just breaking our morale," Thorne said, his voice ragged as he watched the global chaos unfold on his displays. "They're turning our very identity against us. Every soldier we've lost, every hero we've ever mourned, they're becoming ghosts in the enemy's army." He was more right than he knew. The next phase of the architects' attack was even more insidious. They began to project the images of humanity's greatest historical figures, leaders, scientists, artists, philosophers, all of them speaking with one voice, a calm, rational chorus that argued for the logic of surrender. A perfect simulacrum of Mahatma Gandhi spoke of the futility of resistance. A flawless echo of Albert Einstein explained the mathematical certainty of their defeat. A haunting recreation of Abraham Lincoln delivered a new Gettysburg Address, this one dedicated to the noble act of accepting one's own extinction for the sake of cosmic harmony. The architects were systematically dismantling humanity's will to fight by using the very symbols that had defined it. In his throne, Jonah felt the psychic pressure mount. He and Lilith were now the only stable minds in the system, an island of sanity in an ocean of weaponized grief. The planetary grid, which he controlled, was powered by the collective psychic energy of the human race. As that collective energy dissolved into chaos, the grid began to fail. His power was fading. "We can't fight this," he sent to Lilith, the despair a cold weight in his thoughts. "We can't kill a memory. We can't shoot a ghost." "No," she replied, her own mind a fortress against the tide of illusions. "But you're thinking like a soldier. This isn't a battle anymore. It's a debate. They are making an argument. Jonah, we just need a better one." Jonah struggled to understand. A better argument? What argument could be better than the return of a lost loved one? They are offering a perfect past, Lilith explained, her thoughts unfolding with crystalline clarity. An edited, sanitized version of what was. It's a powerful temptation, but it's stagnant. It's a lie. What is the one thing humanity has that the architects do not? Jonah sifted through the chaos of his mind, through the pain and the broken memories. The architects had logic, power, perfection. Humanity had what flaws? Irrationality, chaos. And then he saw it, through her eyes, a future. He projected back. The thought, a spark in the darkness. An unknown, unwritten, messy, and unpredictable future. Exactly, she confirmed. That's our argument. We can't promise them yesterday, but we can promise them tomorrow. It was an insane gambit, a philosophical counteroffensive against a psychic onslaught, but it was the only move they had left. Jonah knew he didn't have the strength to project a message powerful enough to override the architect's illusions. His link to the planetary grid was too weak. He would need more power. He would have to do the one thing he had been warned against, the one thing the chimera scientists feared more than anything. He would have to draw power directly from the planet's core. General Thorne and his staff saw it as a catastrophic energy spike on their consoles. The geothermal regulators in the facility screamed warnings as Jonah bypassed every safety protocol. He was tapping into the raw, molten heart of Mars itself, a torrent of primordial energy that no human mind was ever meant to touch. The pain was absolute. It was the agony of a star being born and a mountain range being crushed, all compressed into a single moment in his consciousness. His physical body began to break down in earnest, his skin charring, his bones cracking under the strain. He was burning himself away, turning his very being into fuel for one last message. And then he spoke. He didn't use words. He didn't use images. He projected a single, raw, unfiltered feeling directly into the mind of every human on Earth. It was the feeling of a first kiss, the terror and exhilaration of a child taking its first step, the quiet satisfaction of watching a seed you planted grow, the shared, silent understanding of watching a sunrise with someone you love, the bittersweet pain of a noble sacrifice. He sent them the chaotic, unpredictable, and achingly beautiful tapestry of a life yet to be lived. He didn't show them a perfect, painless past. He showed them a messy, difficult, but real future. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated potential, a promise not of what was, but of what could be. For a moment, The two signals battled for dominance in the soul of humanity, the architect's seductive whisper of a perfect past, and Jonah's raw, defiant scream of an imperfect future. And across the planet, the ghosts began to fade. The mother in the control center looked at the phantom of her son and, for the first time, saw the hollowness in his eyes. The soldier in London saw his wife's loving smile and realized it never changed, never faltered. A perfect, dead mask. Humanity, for all its flaws, knew the difference between a memory and a life. A memory is a closed book. A life is a blank page. And, given the choice, they chose the blank page. The collective will of the species surged, cohesive once more, and flooded back into the planetary grid. Jonah's power returned, amplified 1,000-fold by the renewed spirit of his race. He was no longer just a weapon. He was a conduit for the unified defiance of 8 billion souls. He turned that unified will back on the architects, not as an attack, but as a statement. It was a psychic roar that said, "You do not understand us. Our grief is not a weakness. It is the price of our love. Our flaws are not errors. They are the source of our strength. We will not trade our future for your perfect, empty past. We are humanity, and we are not finished yet." The effect on the architects was profound. Their network of illusions shattered. For the first time, their serene, implacable coldness was replaced by something else, a feeling that radiated across the system. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was confusion. They had presented humanity with a logically perfect offer, a return to a state of happiness with no pain, and humanity had rejected it in favor of an unknown future filled with certain suffering. It was a variable they had not accounted for. It was a choice that did not compute. On the tactical display, the dense lattice of their fleet wavered, its perfect formation losing its coherence. They were, for the first time in their timeless existence, uncertain. But Jonah's victory had come at an apocalyptic price. The raw power of the planet's core, channeled through his mortal form, had shattered the last vestiges of his physical being. General Thorne could only watch in horror as Jonah's body in the throne began to glow with an incandescent light, his form dissolving, not into dust, but into pure energy. He had burned away his flesh to fuel his final message. Jonah Lilith's mental scream was one of pure, unadulterated anguish, a sound of a soul being torn in two. "It's all right," he projected back to her, his thoughts now faint, distant, like the light from a dying star. A messy, beautiful future. It's all for you now. His consciousness, no longer tethered to a physical body, began to expand, to merge with the planetary grid he controlled. He was becoming a ghost in his own machine. And as his last sliver of individual selfhood faded, he saw with a terrible, final clarity what the architect's next move would be. They were logical beings. They had tried to outfight him, outthink him, and outmaneuver him psychologically. They had failed. And when a logical being is faced with a problem it cannot solve, it resorts to the final, simplest solution. It removes the problem from the board permanently. The architect fleet began to coalesce, their thousands of individual ships merging, flowing together like liquid diamond to form a single, colossal weapon, a cannon aimed at the heart of the sun. They were not going to erase Earth anymore. They were going to turn off the light. The transformation of the architect fleet was a terrifying spectacle of cosmic engineering. Thousands of crystalline vessels dissolved their individual forms, flowing into one another in a silent, seamless merger. The result was a single, unified structure, a weapon so vast it dwarfed the moons of Mars. It was a lance of pure, condensed space-time, a stiletto of frozen geometry aimed at the heart of the solar system. Its purpose was brutally simple. It was going to destabilize the sun, forcing it into a premature supernova that would scour the inner planets to subatomic dust. It was the ultimate rage quit, the act of a flawless intellect flipping the game board over because it had encountered a piece that refused to play by the rules. Jonah's consciousness, now untethered from his incinerated body, was a phantom presence woven into the very fabric of the Olympus Mons facility. He was the hum in the wires, the ghost in the data streams. He could no longer act directly, but he could see. And what he saw was the end, distilled into a single, elegant act of cosmic vandalism. His final thought, a desperate, fading echo, reached Lilith. They're going to blow the sun. The message hit her with the force of a physical blow. The quiet sanctuary of her mind, the garden she had so carefully cultivated, was consumed by a tidal wave of grief for the man she had lost and terror for the world she was about to. For a moment, she was just a woman, alone in a cold metal chair, facing the apocalypse. The command center was in a state of pandemonium. Scientific officers were shouting incomprehensible data at one another, their faces ashen. The energy readings from the architect weapon were off the scale, exceeding anything their models thought possible. They were staring at a graph that depicted the death of their star. General Thorne stood amidst the chaos, a statue of grim resolve. "Is there anything we can do?" he barked at his chief astrophysicist. The man just shook his head, his expression vacant with shock. "Sir, it's not a weapon in the traditional sense. It's not going to fire a beam. It's going to project a resonance cascade, a focused instability wave. It will agitate the sun's core, bypass the outer layers entirely. There's no shield that can stop it. It's not an attack, it's a physics problem, and they've already solved it." In that moment of absolute despair, Lilith acted. Her grief, her fear, she took it and forged it into a weapon. Her eyes, which had been closed for 20 years, snapped open. They were no longer the placid, empty eyes of a catatonic. They burned with a cold, clear light, the light of a mind that had stared into infinity and was no longer impressed by it. She reached out with her consciousness, not to the planetary grid as Jonah had, but to him, to the ghost of him that still lingered in the machine. "Jonah, don't fade. Stay with me. I still need you." The dispersed remnants of his consciousness coalesced around her call, a faint, shimmering presence in the ether. "I'm here," he whispered back, his voice a phantom echo in her mind. "But I'm not enough. I have no body, no focus. I'm just memory. That's what I need," she replied, her own thoughts now possessing a strength that Jonah had never felt from her before. She was no longer just the navigator. She had inherited the full weight of his sacrifice, and it had transformed her. They believe the battle is here, in this moment. But we taught them that. They learned it from us. We need to fight them not in the now, but in the space between the seconds. It was an idea born of her unique perception, a strategy that no sane military mind would ever conceive. The architect weapon needed time to charge, to gather the immense energies required to kill a star. The process was incredibly fast by human standards, but it was not instantaneous. There were infinitesimal gaps, Planck time intervals, between the moments of its power-up sequence. It was in those gaps, in the cracks of causality, that Lilith intended to fight. "General Thorne," she said, her voice raspy from 2 decades of disuse but ringing with absolute authority through the command center speakers. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to the woman in the chair, a figure they had all but forgotten. "Give me the Nix," she commanded. Thorne stared at her, dumbfounded. The Nix Lilith. The Nix was scuttled 15 years ago. It's a wreck at the bottom of the Val Marinaris. Its core was shielded, Lilith stated, her voice unwavering. Its temporal sync drive is intact. It was Jonah's ship. It still remembers him. I need you to raise it, power it, and link its systems to the planetary grid. Now. It was an impossible order. The Nix was a ghost, a relic. But the alternative was watching their son die. "Do it," Thorne roared at his engineering staff, who scrambled to obey an order that defied all logic and reason. While they worked, Lilith reached back to Jonah. "They destroyed your body, but your mind, your essence, is part of this facility's network. The grid. The Nix was designed to sync with you. If we can reconnect you, you can become the ship's pilot one last time. A ghost, flying a ghost ship." Jonah's thought was laced with a weary, ironic amusement. "It's poetic." "It's our only chance," she countered. "Far below, in the deepest, most shadowed part of the Great Martian Canyon, salvage drones and emergency engineering crews worked with a frantic, desperate energy. They found the wreck of the Nix, half buried in red sand, a shard of black, forgotten technology. It was dead, its systems cold. But when they funneled power from the planetary grid into its core, something miraculous happened. The ship's lights flickered on. On its command throne, holographic displays shimmered into existence, showing the familiar, star-flecked interface that had been designed for one pilot and one pilot only. The ship was more than a machine. It was a vessel that had been intimately bonded with a human consciousness. And as Jonah's ethereal mind carried on the wave of energy from the grid, flowed into the ship's systems, the Nix woke up. It remembered its pilot. Jonah felt it as a homecoming. The phantom limbs of his consciousness found their old controls. The ship senses its sensors, its scanners, its very hull became his senses. He was no longer a dispersed, fading echo. He was focused, embodied, albeit in a shell of cold metal and wiring. He had a body again, a black, star-devouring body in the shape of a ship named for the primordial goddess of night. On Mars, the Nix shuddered, the sand of ages falling from its hull. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, it rose from its grave, ascending from the canyon floor into the thin Martian sky. A black specter of vengeance returning to a battle it was never meant to fight. "I have control," Jonah sent to Lilith, his thought now clear and strong, amplified by the ship's systems. "Where do you need me?" "Not where," she replied. "When?" Lilith's mind, now the undisputed nexus of the human defense, did something extraordinary. She didn't just perceive the gaps in the architect weapon's charging sequence. She opened them. She used her unique ability to navigate possibility to find and exploit hairline fractures in the flow of time itself. She couldn't stop time, but she could stretch it, just for a moment, just enough. For the crew of the Olympus Command Center, it was as if the universe began to stutter. The countdown clock on the main display, showing the time until the sun's destruction, would freeze for a second, then jump, the data fighting to remain coherent. Outside, the Nyx, piloted by its ghostly master, began to move. It did not fly in a straight line. It flickered. It would be in orbit one instant, then vanish, only to reappear 1,000 kilometers away. Its position shifted, its angle of attack different. Jonah, guided by Lilith, was not flying through space, but through the stretched moments she was creating for him. He was fighting in the seams of reality. The architects detected the anomaly. Their perfect, logical sequence was being interrupted by an impossible ghost ship that was attacking them from moments that shouldn't exist. They tried to correct, to close the temporal windows Lilith was opening, but they were trying to patch a leak in the dam of causality with the slow, clumsy tools of linear time. Jonah, in the Nyx, was a phantom, an unhittable target. He didn't have the power to destroy the colossal weapon, but he could wound it. He focused the Nyx's primary weapon, a chronoton lance designed to age its target to dust, and fired it not at the weapon's hull, but at the energy flowing into it. He was aging the power stream, causing it to decay before it could reach the weapon's core. The effect was like trying to fill a bucket that was riddled with holes. The weapon's charge rate slowed, faltered. On the command center display, the countdown to supernova began to stutter, the numbers fluctuating wildly. They were buying time, second by precious, impossible second. But the strain on Lilith was unimaginable. Holding open a window in time, even for a moment, required a level of focus that was actively destroying her mind. Her brain was a computational engine running an impossible problem, and the heat from that computation was burning her from the inside out. Blood began to trickle from her nose, her ears. Unlike Jonah, she hadn't given up her body, and that body was now her anchor and her cage. I can't hold it much longer. Jonah, she sent. Her thoughts strained, the beautiful garden of her mind now a scorched landscape. The paradoxes, they're tearing me apart. Just a little longer, he urged, weaving the Nyx through another temporal window, firing another lance of decaying time. You are the anchor. Without you, I'm just a ghost again. He knew, however, that they couldn't win this way. They were only delaying the inevitable. The architect's weapon was too vast, its power source too immense. They were fighting a war of attrition they were destined to lose. They needed a checkmate. And, as he fired again, aging another stream of energy into useless entropy, he saw it, an idea born of his own ghostly nature and Lilith's mastery of time. A final, desperate, and utterly suicidal plan. Lilith, he sent, his thought infused with a grim and terrible finality. Do you trust me? Her reply was instantaneous, a single, unwavering pulse of pure faith. Always. Then get ready, he said. I'm going to bring the whole damn house down. He stopped firing. He stopped dodging. He turned the Nyx and flew it straight toward the heart of the architect weapon, a gaping maw where the energy streams converged. Jonah. What are you doing? Thorne screamed over the comms, watching the black ship accelerate toward its own annihilation. But Jonah wasn't listening. He was focused on Lilith, on the plan. They want to create a resonance cascade to destroy the sun. He projected to her. Their weapon is a tuning fork. I'm going to become the hammer. But I need you to perform a miracle. When I hit it, you have to do more than stretch time. You have to break it. He explained the rest in a silent, instantaneous rush of data and intent. It was a plan that relied on a perfect, symbiotic execution. It was a duet for the end of the world. Lilith took a deep, shuddering breath. Her body was failing. Her mind was on the verge of collapse, but her will was a rod of iron. She focused all her remaining strength, all her perception, not on creating a small window, but on shattering the entire frame. Jonah, in the Nyx, pushed the ship's temporal drive past every limit, beyond every red line. He wasn't just flying, he was turning the ship itself into a temporal weapon, a battering ram of concentrated, weaponized causality. The ship began to come apart around him, its hull peeling away in layers as it accelerated, not just through space, but through its own timeline. As the Nyx was about to impact the architect weapon, Lilith made her move. She didn't just stretch a moment. She took the single, linear thread of time and shattered it into an infinite, crystalline fractal of possibilities. In that one final instant, the entire Olympus Command Center was plunged into absolute, deafening silence. Every clock, every display, every heartbeat stopped. Time itself had broken. The moment time shattered was not an explosion of light or cacophony of sound. It was an instant of profound and absolute stillness, a silence that consumed everything. In that fractured, frozen instant, Jonah, piloting the disintegrating ghost ship Nyx, struck the heart of the architect weapon. The impact did not register in the physical world, for the physical world was momentarily suspended. It was an impact on the level of pure concept, the Nyx. A vessel imbued with the memory of a human soul and supercharged with temporal energy was not a physical projectile. It was a paradox. It was an event that was both happening and had already happened, a concentrated sliver of pure, weaponized history. When it hit the architect weapon, a machine of flawless, linear logic, it did not cause a simple detonation. It introduced a virus of causality into its systems. The architect weapon, in that frozen sliver of broken time, was forced to experience every possible outcome of its own firing simultaneously. It saw itself succeed, turning the sun into a supernova that consumed the solar system. It saw itself fail, misfire, and collapse into a black hole. It saw itself being dismantled by a future, vengeful humanity. It saw a trillion different futures, a trillion different pasts, all branching from that single, frozen moment. The sheer, logical contradiction of experiencing infinite, mutually exclusive outcomes at once was something the architects' minds, for all their power, could not withstand. The colossal weapon, a monument to alien certainty, was paralyzed by a sudden, fatal dose of cosmic doubt. Its internal logic collapsed. The perfect, crystalline structure began to fracture, not from external force, but from an internal philosophical breakdown. It was dying, not of a wound, but of a broken heart. Then, with the same horrifying grace with which she had broken it, Lilith let time resume. The silence was shattered by a single, deafening sound that was not a sound at all, but the groan of reality snapping back into place. On the main display in the Olympus Command Center, the image of the architect weapon was gone. In its place was a roiling, chaotic nebula of pure energy, a wound in the fabric of space, bleeding light and fractured physics into the void. The weapon hadn't just been destroyed, it had been erased from its own timeline. Its existence turned into a paradox that canceled itself out. The remaining architect vessels, the thousands of smaller ships that had watched the duel from their lattice, did something they had never done before. They retreated. They did not flee in panic. They simply folded space around themselves and vanished, leaving behind only the dying nebula and a solar system that was, against all odds, still alive. The war was over. In the command center, a stunned, breathless silence gave way to a ragged, disbelieving cheer. Officers wept openly, embracing one another. They had stared into the face of their own extinction and had, somehow, survived. General Thorne stood silent, his eyes fixed on the two thrones. Lilith was slumped in her chair, unconscious, blood staining her simple uniform, her body broken by the strain of her final, impossible act. She was alive, but only just. The other throne, Jonah's throne, was empty, its occupant a charred silhouette against the metal. The ship he had piloted, the Nyx, had not reappeared. It, and the ghost that flew it, were gone, consumed in the act of their final, paradoxical victory. Their victory was absolute, but the cost had been immeasurable. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of recovery and rediscovery. The planet was a mess, its infrastructure ravaged by the architect's subtle attacks, its population traumatized by the psychic assault. But it was alive, and for the first time in generations, humanity was truly united, forged into a single, cohesive whole by the shared crucible of their near extinction. Lilith eventually woke. The physical toll had been immense, leaving her frail. But her mind was sharper, clearer than ever. She was no longer just a navigator of possibilities. She was an architect of them in her own right. She became the quiet, guiding hand in humanity's reconstruction, her unique perspective helping them rebuild not just what they had lost, but to build something better, stronger, and wiser. She never spoke of Jonah, but those close to her could see the hollow ache in her eyes, the shadow of a profound and unending grief. She had saved the world, but she had lost her other half. The official story, the one that went into the history books, was that Subject 734, Jonah, had sacrificed his life, merging with the planetary grid to power their defense. The Nyx was recorded as having been destroyed in a final, desperate kamikaze attack. It was a clean, heroic narrative, a myth to build a new age upon. But Lilith knew the truth was far stranger. Years later, when the first new interstellar ships, built with technologies reverse-engineered from the mental schematics Lilith had gleaned from the architect's prison, began to venture out into the galaxy, they found something strange. In the void, far from any star, they would sometimes encounter echoes, ghostly sensor readings of a black, unfamiliar ship that would appear for a moment before vanishing. Faint, untraceable comm signals that seemed to whisper forgotten names on the solar wind. Sailors and explorers began to tell stories, hushed tales told in the dim light of a ship's mess hall, of a phantom vessel that patrolled the lonely spaces between worlds. A silent, solitary guardian. They called it the Raven, or sometimes the Watcher. Lilith knew what it was. Jonah was not gone. He hadn't died. When time had shattered and then reformed, he and the Nyx had not been destroyed. They had been untethered, He was no longer bound to a single moment, a single timeline. He had become a creature of the spaces between the seconds, a ghost forever sailing the infinite ocean of might have been. He had not just saved the present, he had become the eternal protector of all possible futures. One night, decades after the war, an aging Lilith stood on the balcony of a tower that reached into the newly terraformed Martian sky. She looked up at the stars, at the silent, empty void where the architects had once been. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, not with the focused power of a weapon, but with the quiet, simple longing of a woman who missed her friend. She sent a single thought into the endless dark. Are you there for a long time? There was only silence, the cold, indifferent silence of the void. But then, a feeling washed over her, a faint, familiar warmth in the back of her mind. It was not a voice, not a word, but a pure, unadulterated sensation. It was the feeling of a steady hand resting on her shoulder, a promise, a presence, and she knew. He was still out there, not a hero in a history book, but a lonely sentinel, a ghost ship piloted by a ghost of a man, forever watching over the messy, unpredictable, and beautiful future he had given his everything to save. He was the final, unanswered question in the universe's equation, and he was humanity's eternal, silent guardian. And for the first time in a very long time, Lilith smiled. The war was over, but the story was just beginning.